The edge. Nobody talks about. Let me ask you something that might change the way you see everything. What if the real gap between people who seem to glide through life, building careers, creating wealth, earning deep relationships, and those who grind for decades and still feel stuck, has absolutely nothing to do with talent, nothing to do with luck, and barely anything to do with hard work? What if the secret is something far more specific, far more learnable, and far more powerful than any of that? Here's what I've discovered after studying high performers across Wall Street, Silicon Valley, elite military units, championship sports franchises, and world-class surgeons. The single biggest differentiator isn't what they know, it's how they think. While most of us react to life, a small group of exceptional people orchestrate it. They don't just handle problems, they see them forming 3 steps before they arrive. They don't just adapt to the game. They rewrite the rules while everyone else is still reading them. They don't just take opportunities. They create the conditions that make opportunities inevitable. This is called strategic thinking, and it is, without question, the most valuable mental skill a human being can develop. It's the ability to spot patterns inside chaos, to locate leverage where others see dead ends, to position yourself for a win before the competition even realizes the game has started. And here's what will genuinely surprise you. This isn't a gift. It's not something you're born with. It's a system, a set of mental frameworks, principles, and habits that anyone can learn, practice, and own. The problem? Nobody teaches this. Not in high school, not in college, not in most corporate training programs. You're handed textbooks full of information and expected to somehow develop strategic wisdom on your own. Most people never do. That ends today. By the time you finish this audiobook, you'll think differently. You'll scan situations that used to overwhelm you and immediately identify the leverage points others are blind to. You'll think 2, 3, and 4 moves ahead. You'll make decisions with the kind of calm precision that used to look like magic from the outside, because you'll know exactly how it works from the inside. You're about to learn to play the game of life the way the best chess grandmasters play chess, with total intention, deep foresight, and the quiet confidence of someone who's already planned the endgame. The strategic mindset revolution. Most people are living on autopilot. They wake up, scan their phone, react to whatever's screaming loudest for their attention, fight fires until they're exhausted, and fall asleep wondering why nothing ever seems to really shift. They feel like the ball in someone else's pinball machine, constantly bounced around by forces they don't control. This isn't weakness. It's the default setting of the human mind in a modern world that's specifically designed to keep you reactive. Every notification, every news cycle, every urgent email is engineered to hijack your attention and pull you into someone else's agenda. And when you're perpetually reacting, you have no bandwidth left to think strategically. Strategic thinkers have cracked the code on something fundamental. Life is not a random series of events happening to you. It's a complex, interconnected system of cause and effect. And that system can be understood, influenced, and directed. Once you truly absorb this, your entire relationship with your circumstances transforms. The strategic mindset begins with a single, electrifying realization. Your current position is not permanent. Whatever situation you find yourself in right now, whether you're thriving, struggling, plateaued, or in genuine crisis, it is temporary and changeable. The only question is whether you will be the force that changes it, or whether you'll wait for the world to decide for you. Master strategic thinkers have developed the rare and powerful ability to zoom out and see the whole map while simultaneously drilling into the terrain immediately in front of them. Most people are stuck in one of two traps. They're either so buried in today's chaos that they've completely lost sight of where they want to be in 5 years, or they're so obsessed with their big, abstract vision that they never take the concrete daily actions that actually create momentum. Strategic thinkers move fluidly between those two levels. They can be in a high-stakes board meeting, making macro-level decisions about market positioning, and 30 minutes later, be deep in the granular details of what needs to happen by Thursday. They don't have to choose one altitude. They live at all of them. Another cornerstone of the strategic mindset is recognizing that everything is connected. Your career choices affect your health. Your health habits affect your cognitive performance. Your cognitive performance affects your financial decisions. Your financial decisions shape your freedom and your relationships. Nothing is isolated. Compartmentalizing your life into neat categories: work life, home life, financial life, health life, and treating them as separate domains is one of the most expensive mental errors you can make. Strategic thinkers see life as an integrated system. They understand that a change in any one area sends ripples through every other area. This awareness doesn't create anxiety, it creates power. Because if everything is connected, then strategic improvements in the right area can create dramatic, cascading improvements everywhere else. Military strategists have a concept called situational awareness, the ability to accurately perceive the full environment, understand the forces in play, and anticipate how those forces are likely to move. Most civilians operate with tunnel vision, locked onto whatever is right in front of them. Strategic thinkers are constantly scanning the broader landscape for signals, for emerging trends, for the early whispers of change that others will only notice when it becomes impossible to ignore. And critically, this awareness must turn inward too. You cannot build an effective strategy without brutal honesty about your own strengths, limitations, blind spots, and default patterns. Not self-criticism, self-knowledge. There is a profound difference between beating yourself up about your weaknesses and clearly understanding them so you can account for them in your planning. Strategic thinkers also maintain a sophisticated relationship with time that most people never develop. They understand that different investments mature on different timescales. Some moves pay off in weeks. Others take years, even decades, to produce their full return. The ability to hold both of those realities simultaneously, to execute brilliantly in the short term while positioning patiently for the long term, is one of the rarest and most valuable skills in existence. Finally, and this may be the most underrated dimension of the strategic mindset, strategic thinkers train themselves to think clearly under pressure. When crisis hits, most people's cognitive capacity narrows dramatically. Fear activates the survival brain. The survival brain is not designed for nuance, creativity, or long-term thinking. It's designed to run, freeze, or fight. Strategic thinkers have developed the discipline to stay calm and clear-headed precisely in the moments when everyone around them is coming apart. That gap between their calm clarity and everyone else's panic is where some of the most significant advantages in life and business are created. Consider what this looks like in the real world. In March 2020, when global markets were in freefall and most executives were paralyzed by uncertainty, a small number of strategically minded leaders were running scenario analyses, identifying which of their assets would hold value and which wouldn't, and making calculated moves that positioned their organizations for the recovery that inevitably followed. They weren't immune to fear. They had simply trained themselves to think through it, rather than being stopped by it. The strategic mindset is also deeply connected to how you interpret setbacks. Most people experience a professional failure, a deal that collapses, a promotion that goes to someone else, a business that doesn't work, and their internal narrative, is fundamentally personal. I failed. I'm not good enough. This proves something damaging about me. Strategic thinkers experience the same event and run a completely different internal process. What actually happened here? What information does this outcome reveal about the system I was operating in? What can I extract from this that makes my next move smarter? They treat setbacks as intelligence, not verdicts. This reframing isn't denial or toxic positivity. It's an analytically rigorous response that generates useful information rather than emotional debris, and it creates a dramatically different experience of difficulty over time. Strategic thinkers don't suffer less, but they suffer less uselessly. Their difficulties tend to compound into wisdom rather than accumulating as trauma. The strategic mindset, ultimately, is a decision about the relationship you'll have with your own life. You can be a passenger, experiencing whatever the road brings and hoping most of it is pleasant. Or you can be a driver with a map, a plan, and the skills to navigate unexpected conditions without losing your way. The vehicle is the same. The destination is determined by which seat you choose to occupy. The architecture of strategic intelligence. Strategic intelligence is not the same thing as being smart in the traditional sense. In fact, some of the most analytically brilliant people, the ones who dominated standardized testing, who graduated at the top of their class, can be surprisingly poor strategic thinkers. Because conventional academic success rewards finding the single correct answer to clearly defined problems. And real life, with its ambiguity, its incomplete information, and its ever-shifting variables, does not work that way. Strategic intelligence is about developing the cognitive architecture to navigate complexity while making consequential decisions without ever having all the information you'd want. The first pillar of this architecture is pattern recognition. Every system, every market, every human behavior, every technological curve follows recognizable patterns. The difference is when you see them. Most people notice a pattern only after it has fully played out, which means the opportunity has already moved on. Strategic thinkers train themselves to detect emerging patterns while they're still forming, giving them the ability to position themselves before the wave has crested. This requires consuming information differently. Instead of reading for content alone, you read for structure. Instead of observing events, you hunt for the forces generating those events. Instead of noting what happened, you obsessively ask why it happened when it did, and what conditions made it possible. This relentless why habit rewires the way your brain processes the world. The second pillar is systems thinking. Systems thinking is the ability to see how different components of a complex system interact, how a change in one area creates cascading effects elsewhere, and how the system as a whole behaves in ways that can't be predicted by analyzing any individual part. Most people think linearly. They assume causes and effects are proportional and directly connected. Strategic thinkers understand that small inputs can produce enormous outputs when applied at the right leverage point, and that the most powerful interventions are often at places that seem completely unrelated to the desired outcome. A central concept within systems thinking is the feedback loop. Positive feedback loops amplify change. They create the conditions for exponential growth or exponential decline. Negative feedback loops create stability and resistance to change. Once you learn to identify these loops, you stop fighting the currents of the systems you operate in and start surfing them. The third pillar is scenario planning. Rather than building a single mental model of how things will unfold, and then being blindsided when reality disagrees, strategic thinkers develop multiple parallel scenarios: best case, worst case, and several plausible midpoints. This isn't pessimism, it's flexibility. When you've already thought through how you'd navigate various futures, you can act decisively when one of them arrives, while others are still processing what just happened. The fourth pillar is temporal thinking, the ability to simultaneously evaluate decisions across multiple time horizons. Every choice has immediate consequences, medium-term implications, and long-term effects. Most people are primarily focused on the immediate, occasionally considering the medium term, and rarely giving serious thought to the long-term trajectory. Strategic thinkers run all three calculations before committing to a course of action, and they look specifically for decisions that create positive outcomes across all three time horizons simultaneously. The fifth pillar, and perhaps the most transformative, is metacognitive awareness. This is the ability to think about your own thinking, to become conscious of your mental models, to recognize when they might be distorting your perception, and to deliberately seek out perspectives that challenge your assumptions. Most people are completely unconscious of their own thinking patterns, and therefore entirely at their mercy. Strategic thinkers make their mental processes visible to themselves so they can deliberately upgrade them. And woven through all of it is emotional intelligence. Emotions aren't the enemy of good strategy. They're information about values, about threats, about what truly matters. But unmanaged emotions can produce catastrophically bad decisions. Strategic thinkers have learned to feel without being controlled by what they feel, and to factor the emotional dynamics of every situation into their strategic calculations. Here's something worth sitting with. The most consistently successful people you'll encounter across elite domains, whether that's technology, entrepreneurship, investment management, elite athletics, or diplomatic negotiation, tend to share a specific combination of these capacities. They are genuinely curious about patterns. They think in systems rather than isolated events. They plan for multiple futures rather than assuming one. They evaluate decisions across time horizons simultaneously. They understand their own mental patterns well enough to compensate for their blind spots. And they read emotional dynamics as readily as they read financial statements or technical data. This combination isn't accidental, and it's not genetic. It's the result of deliberate practice in developing specific cognitive capacities, the same practice available to anyone willing to commit to it. The architecture of strategic intelligence is learnable. What it requires is not exceptional raw intelligence, but the willingness to practice thinking differently until new thinking patterns become automatic. The 7 laws of strategic advantage. There are laws governing how strategic advantage is created, held, and lost. These laws operate whether or not you're aware of them, but when you understand them consciously, you gain the ability to work with them rather than against them. Master these 7, and you'll have a framework for creating advantage in virtually any situation life presents. The first law, the law of positioning. Your position determines your options. Your options determine your outcomes. Execution matters. But if you're executing brilliantly from the wrong position, you're burning energy for marginal results. Positioning is about placing yourself where good outcomes are probable, where you have multiple paths forward while others have few, and where you can deploy your strengths without exposing your vulnerabilities. Positioning also includes how you're perceived. Sometimes the most powerful position is to be underestimated. Sometimes it's to be seen as the indispensable connector. Sometimes it's to project an unpredictability that makes manipulation difficult. Perception is reality in human interactions, and master strategists shape perception deliberately. The second law, the law of timing. The identical action can succeed brilliantly or fail completely, depending solely on when it's taken. Strategic timing requires understanding cycles, recognizing inflection points, and having the emotional discipline to wait for the right moment combined with the decisiveness to move when it arrives. The hardest skill in timing isn't knowing when to act. It's resisting the urge to act too early out of impatience or too late out of fear. The third law, the law of concentration success, comes from focusing your finite resources where they create maximum impact. Most people disperse their energy across too many fronts simultaneously, making incremental progress everywhere and mastery nowhere. Strategic concentration means identifying the critical few activities that will drive the overwhelming majority of your results and ruthlessly eliminating, or at minimum minimizing, everything else. The fourth law, the law of leverage. In physics, a small force applied at the right point through the right mechanism can move enormous weight. The same principle applies to strategy. Small, well-placed efforts can produce disproportionate results when applied at the right leverage points in a system. Most people pursue results through pure volume, working more hours, putting in more effort, applying more force. Strategic thinkers look for the fulcrum first. Leverage compounds when different types multiply each other. Your expertise becomes more valuable when combined with the right network. Your network becomes more powerful when backed by genuine credibility. Your credibility becomes more impactful when deployed in the right context at the right moment. The fifth law, the law of adaptation. The environment never stops changing. Strategies that produced results last year may be actively counterproductive this year. Most people resist change and try to force outdated approaches to work in new conditions. Strategic thinkers constantly sense shifts in their environment and adjust their tactics, while never losing sight of their core objectives. They distinguish between what must stay fixed, values, long-term direction, and what must remain fluid, methods, routes, tactics. The sixth law, the law of information. Asymmetry, having better information than others, creates significant advantage. But information is only valuable if you can act on it before it becomes widely available. Strategic information advantage comes from three sources: superior information sources, superior processing capabilities, and the decisiveness to act on insights before they become common knowledge. This law also cuts the other way. Understanding what information your competitors don't have or are actively misinterpreting is often just as valuable as superior information itself. The seventh law, the law of optionality. Having multiple viable options is worth more than having one perfect plan. Most people create detailed single-path plans and then try to execute them exactly as designed, which leaves them brittle when circumstances change. Strategic optionality means architecting your approach so that you can choose between multiple paths as new information arrives. Investments that open possibilities are often worth more than investments that optimize for one specific outcome. These 7 laws don't operate independently. They amplify each other in a continuous feedback system. Good positioning creates better timing opportunities. Better timing enables deeper concentration. Deeper concentration amplifies leverage. Leverage supports adaptation. Adaptation builds information advantages. Information expands options. And optionality improves positioning. Understanding these interconnections allows you to build strategies that are exponentially greater than the sum of their parts. Let's make these laws concrete with a single integrated example. Imagine a professional who has spent 3 years building deep expertise in artificial intelligence applications for healthcare, a domain where most healthcare executives don't yet speak the technical language, and most AI engineers don't yet understand the regulatory and clinical realities of healthcare. This person has positioned themselves at a junction where 2 important worlds don't yet effectively communicate: law of positioning. They've done this before. AI in healthcare became a mainstream topic, entering when the field was still emerging rather than crowded. Law of timing. Rather than trying to become broadly knowledgeable about all of AI or all of healthcare, they've concentrated on this specific intersection, law of concentration. The combination of technical and domain knowledge creates informational leverage that neither a pure technologist nor a pure healthcare professional possesses. Law of leverage. As the regulatory environment evolves, they continuously update their knowledge and adjust their positioning accordingly. Law of adaptation. They maintain relationships with both technology innovators and healthcare decision makers, giving them information flows that most people in either community don't have access to. Law of information asymmetry. And because they've built genuine expertise rather than committing to a single employer or a single approach, they have multiple viable career paths available at any point. Law of optionality. This isn't a fictional career. Thousands of professionals are building exactly this kind of strategically coherent positioning in fields across the economy. The 7 laws aren't academic theory. They are the operating principles of people who are consistently creating advantage in their fields. Whether they know these names for what they're doing or not, your task is to make these principles conscious and deliberate so you can apply them with intention rather than stumbling into them by accident. Reading the invisible game. Every situation you walk into is an iceberg. What you can see on the surface represents perhaps 20% of what's actually happening. Beneath that visible layer are hidden agendas, unspoken power dynamics, deep historical contexts, entrenched psychological patterns, and systemic forces that are frequently more decisive than anything visible to the naked eye. Learning to read these invisible dimensions is what separates someone who's strategically capable from someone who's merely intelligent. The first invisible layer is the true motivations of the people involved. What people say they want and what they actually want are very often different things. Someone might claim they want a more efficient process. What they actually want is more control. Someone might say they want collaboration. What they actually want is credit. Someone might advocate for a particular solution. What they actually want is to prove their previous judgment was right. Reading motivations requires shifting your attention from what people say to what people consistently do. Behavior patterns, especially under pressure, reveal true priorities with far more accuracy than any stated intention. The second invisible layer is informal power. Every organization, every team, every social group has a formal hierarchy. Titles, org charts, official authority. And then it has the real power structure, which is often something else entirely. Understanding who actually makes decisions, who has the ear of decision makers, who holds veto power through their expertise or their social position, and who serves as the connectors between otherwise disconnected factions. This knowledge is indispensable for effective navigation. Power can come from many sources. Formal authority, yes, but also specialized expertise, long-term relationships, control of critical information, the ability to create problems for others, or simply being genuinely irreplaceable to the people who matter. The person with the most official status in a room isn't always the most strategically significant person in that room. The third invisible layer is historical context. Every situation has a history you need to understand. Decisions made 2 years ago are shaping the options available today. Relationships built or broken in the past are determining who will help and who will resist your plans. Patterns established over time are creating invisible constraints on what's actually possible, regardless of what's officially permitted. The fourth invisible layer is cultural dynamics. Every group develops its own culture, a set of unwritten rules governing what behaviors are actually rewarded, what can be discussed openly, what must stay underground, and how things really get done. These cultural patterns override formal policies with remarkable consistency. Strategic thinkers decode cultural signals rapidly and work within cultural constraints rather than wasting energy fighting them. The fifth invisible layer is psychological patterns. People and groups have predictable psychological tendencies that reliably influence how they receive information, reach decisions, and respond to various approaches. Some people require extensive proof before committing to anything. Others make rapid judgments on minimal information. Some are energized by competition. Others respond far better to collaborative framing. Strategic thinkers read these patterns quickly and tailor their approach accordingly. The sixth invisible layer is systemic forces. Every situation exists inside larger currents, economic cycles, technological disruptions, regulatory trends, demographic shifts, cultural movements. Individual effort, no matter how impressive, cannot overcome a powerful systemic current working against it. But when you align your efforts with a favorable systemic force, you can achieve results that look, from the outside, entirely disproportionate to your apparent resources. The seventh invisible layer is the web of feedback loops and unintended consequences. Every action creates reactions. Those reactions create further reactions. Many of those downstream effects were never anticipated and could not easily have been predicted. Strategic thinkers track these chains of cause and effect with ongoing vigilance, updating their understanding as new information emerges. Reading the invisible game ultimately requires something that sounds simple, but is genuinely difficult to sustain: intellectual humility. The moment you become convinced you've fully figured out what's happening, you stop gathering new information and you become vulnerable to the unexpected. The best strategic minds maintain productive skepticism about their own analysis, even when they're highly confident. They keep looking. There's a practical discipline that intelligence professionals call structured analytical thinking that is directly applicable to reading any complex situation. It involves 3 habits practiced consistently. First, actively generating alternative explanations for what you're observing rather than accepting the first plausible story. If someone is behaving unusually, your instinct might be to assume one explanation. Structured analytical thinking forces you to generate at least 3 other explanations before accepting any of them. Second, deliberately seeking information that contradicts your current understanding rather than only noticing what confirms it. This requires genuine intellectual courage because most people feel validated by confirmation and threatened by contradiction. Third, continuously updating your understanding as new data arrives rather than defending a position you've already committed to. These 3 habits, practiced consistently, will make you dramatically better at reading the invisible game, better at understanding what's actually happening beneath the surface of any situation you find yourself in. And in a world where most people are operating on the visible 5%, the ability to navigate the other 95% is a genuine superpower. The science of strategic decision-making. Most people make decisions using whatever combination of gut feeling, emotional state, and immediately available information happens to be present in the moment. For low-stakes, reversible decisions, this works adequately. For high-stakes, complex decisions with long-lasting consequences, the kind that can define the trajectory of careers, companies, and relationships, this approach fails at a rate that's almost predictable. Strategic decision-making requires something more systematic. Not cold and robotic, but disciplined and structured in ways that dramatically improve outcomes. It starts before you even consider the options in front of you. It starts with how you frame the decision itself. Most people accept the initial framing of a choice without question. But how you frame a decision determines what options you consider and how you evaluate them. The same situation can be legitimately framed as a problem to eliminate, an opportunity to capture, a risk to manage, or a constraint to circumvent, and each framing opens a completely different solution space. Effective decision framing begins with a clarifying question. What are you actually trying to decide? Are you selecting between specific alternatives? Are you trying to generate new alternatives that don't yet exist? Are you making a one-time choice or establishing a precedent? Are you optimizing for a single variable or balancing multiple competing priorities simultaneously? Once you've properly framed the decision, the next step is expanding your option set beyond the obvious. Most people anchor on the first 2 or 3 possibilities that come to mind. Strategic decision makers push further, actively generating creative alternatives that conventional thinking would overlook. Combining elements from different standard approaches, adapting solutions borrowed from entirely different contexts, or inventing options that didn't previously exist. The evaluation phase requires thinking probabilistically rather than deterministically. Most people evaluate options based on their most likely single outcome. Strategic thinkers think about the full distribution of possible outcomes and their respective probabilities. An option with a moderate expected outcome but significant upside potential and limited downside might be clearly superior to an option with a higher expected outcome but catastrophic downside risk. And the best decision is sometimes not the one that's optimal in any single scenario. It's the one that keeps you viable across all the scenarios that might unfold. Risk management in strategic decision-making requires understanding a fundamental distinction. Risk is different from uncertainty. Risk involves situations where you can roughly estimate the probability of different outcomes. Uncertainty involves situations where you don't yet know what the possible outcomes even are. Most real strategic decisions involve uncertainty, which demands different analytical tools, scenario planning, robust strategies that work reasonably well across multiple futures, and a deep preference for reversible over irreversible commitments. Cognitive biases are among the most dangerous enemies of sound strategic decisions. Confirmation bias pushes you to seek information that validates what you already believe while filtering out contradictory evidence. Anchoring bias causes you to rely excessively on the first number or piece of information you encounter. Availability bias causes you to dramatically overweight scenarios and outcomes that are easy to recall vividly. These aren't character flaws. They're hardwired features of human cognition, but they can be systematically counteracted through structured processes, red team analysis, pre-mortem exercises, and deliberate devil's advocate protocols. Time pressure is one of the most consistently underestimated threats to decision quality. When people feel rushed, they collapse to oversimplified mental shortcuts and emotional reactivity. Strategic decision makers build buffer time whenever possible and maintain pre-established frameworks for the moments when fast decisions genuinely can't be avoided. And finally, no decision is complete with the decision itself. Strategic implementation is where most brilliant strategies go to die. The best choice in the world produces no value if it's executed poorly. Strategic decision makers build detailed action plans, identify likely obstacles proactively, establish meaningful success metrics, and create feedback mechanisms that allow for ongoing course correction. There's one more dimension of strategic decision-making that deserves specific attention: the discipline of changing course when evidence demands it, rather than persisting out of sunk cost, bias, or ego protection. Humans have a powerful, deeply wired resistance to admitting that a decision we've made, especially one we've made publicly, one we've invested in significantly, was wrong. The psychological cost of that admission feels almost physical, and that resistance causes intelligent people to throw good resources after bad decisions at a rate that, if you cataloged it honestly, would be shocking. Strategic decision makers develop an unusual relationship with prior decisions. They neither cling to them nor abandon them impulsively. They monitor outcomes against expectations. They ask honestly whether the initial assumptions still hold. And when the evidence accumulates that a different course is warranted, they change course with the same analytical discipline they brought to the original decision. They treat strategy as a living hypothesis rather than a fixed commitment, one that must continuously earn its right to persist. This requires separating intellectual identity from strategic positions. The person who has become identified with a particular strategy, who has championed it publicly, who has built their reputation around it, finds it nearly impossible to change course honestly. The strategic thinker remains identified with the objective rather than with any particular path toward it, which preserves the flexibility to adapt the path without experiencing it as a personal defeat. Thinking 3 moves ahead. The chess grandmaster doesn't look at the board and see only the current position. She sees several positions simultaneously: the position as it stands now, the position that will exist after her next move, the position her opponent will then create, and the position that will follow from that. This multi-move visualization is exactly what separates her from a capable amateur who might understand every individual piece perfectly, but still lose consistently. Strategic anticipation works the same way. Most people think one move ahead. They consider how someone might respond to their initial action. Strategic thinkers map sequences several moves deep, considering how they'll respond to responses, how others will counter those counter moves, and how the whole dynamic will evolve from there. The foundation of this kind of forward thinking is understanding that every action initiates a chain reaction. You move, others respond, new situations emerge, further responses are required. Developing sophisticated mental models of how these chains typically play out, based on deep understanding of the players involved and the systems they're operating in, is what makes anticipation possible. Game theorists describe a technique called backward induction. Instead of thinking forward from your current position, you identify your desired end state and work backward to find the sequence of moves that could logically lead there. This approach reveals which early moves are actually productive toward your ultimate objective and which ones merely seem attractive in isolation but lead into dead ends. Anticipatory thinking also requires deep understanding of the players in any situation and how they're likely to behave. Some people are genuinely collaborative and actively seek mutually beneficial solutions. Others are deeply competitive and perceive every interaction as zero-sum. Some are principle-driven and will stick to their values even at significant personal cost. Others are pragmatic to the core and will shift position based purely on incentive. The same strategic move will produce dramatically different responses from different player types. An aggressive opening that provokes retaliation from a competitive player might inspire cooperative problem-solving from a collaborative one. Understanding who you're dealing with, not just what you want from them, is prerequisite for effective anticipation. Timing and tempo are another critical dimension of thinking ahead. Every strategic situation has a natural rhythm to how it unfolds. Sometimes you want to accelerate that tempo. Moving faster than the opposition can organize effective responses. Sometimes you want to deliberately slow things down, creating space for more favorable conditions to develop, or allowing overextended opponents to make mistakes under their own momentum. And sometimes the most powerful move is to disrupt the expected timing entirely. Scenario branching extends anticipation into the domain of genuine uncertainty. At every significant decision point, multiple futures are possible depending on factors you don't fully control. Rather than betting everything on one scenario, strategic thinkers prepare for multiple contingencies simultaneously. If X develops, the plan is A. If Y develops, the plan shifts to B. If both X and Y unfold together, the response is C. Having these contingent plans already formed allows rapid, confident response when situations change, while others are still processing what just happened. And the most sophisticated level of all, thinking not just about what others will do, but what they think you'll do, and what they think you think they'll do. This recursive reasoning creates genuinely complex strategic terrain. Sometimes the best move is exactly the obvious one, because your opponent has prepared for every complexity, but not the straightforward play. Sometimes the most powerful move is the completely unexpected one, the one that invalidates all their preparation. There's a specific mental exercise that accelerates the development of anticipatory thinking, and it's deceptively simple. After every significant strategic interaction, a negotiation, a difficult conversation, a business decision, take 10 minutes to replay the sequence in slow motion. What move did you make? How did others respond? Did their response match what you anticipated? If not, what did that reveal about your mental model of them? What move did they make that you hadn't prepared for? And what does that tell you about their priorities and constraints? This debrief practice, done consistently, builds the pattern library your brain needs to make accurate multi-move predictions. Every interaction becomes training data. Every surprise becomes a correction to your model of how people and systems actually behave. Over time, you develop an increasingly accurate intuition about how situations are likely to unfold, not because you've become psychic, but because you've done the analytical work of building and refining your predictive models through deliberate, repeated practice. The grandmasters of chess don't calculate every possible sequence from scratch in every game. They recognize patterns, configurations they've seen before in thousands of previous games, and their pattern library allows them to immediately perceive the strategic significance of each position. Strategic thinkers in life and business develop the same kind of pattern library, and it develops the same way, through extensive, deliberate practice combined with honest, disciplined reflection. The leverage multiplier effect. Here's a question worth sitting with. Why do some people produce extraordinary results with what appears to be modest effort, while others exhaust themselves working 70-hour weeks and still struggle to move the needle? The answer, almost always, is leverage. In physics, a lever allows you to move enormous weight with a fraction of the direct force required without it, provided you position the fulcrum correctly and apply the force at the right point. Strategic leverage works identically. It's the art of finding the points in a system where small, well-placed actions produce disproportionately large outcomes. There are 7 types of strategic leverage worth mastering. Positional leverage comes from placing yourself at crucial junctions in networks, industries, or systems. Points where value flows and where you can influence far more than your apparent resources would suggest. Being in the right place isn't just luck. It's the result of deliberate positioning. Strategic positioning means becoming indispensable to key decision makers, establishing yourself as the connector between groups that don't normally interact, or building expertise in an emerging field before it becomes mainstream. Informational leverage comes from knowing something important that others don't, or from processing publicly available information more effectively than others are doing. This isn't about insider trading or unethical information gathering. It's about cultivating superior sources, developing better analytical frameworks, and consistently seeing implications in available data that others miss. Especially powerful is cross-domain pattern recognition. connecting insights from technology and psychology, or from emerging market trends and demographic shifts in ways that single-domain specialists would never see. Relationship leverage multiplies your capabilities through genuine alliances. The right relationship can give you access to resources, information, opportunities, and capabilities that would require years to develop independently. But relationship leverage requires an abundance mindset. You must consistently provide value to others, sometimes with no immediate return, because those relationships become strategic assets precisely when they're maintained generously over time. Technological leverage allows you to automate, scale, and achieve results that would be physically impossible through manual effort alone. But the highest form of technological leverage isn't just using existing tools well. It's anticipating how technological trends will shift the value landscape and positioning yourself to benefit before those shifts become obvious to everyone. Capital leverage encompasses financial capital, reputation, credibility, and social capital, all forms of stored value that can be deployed to access opportunities beyond your immediate capacity. Building capital requires delayed gratification, reinvesting rather than consuming, building reputation through consistent high-quality work over time, and accumulating social capital through generous contributions to others' success. Systemic leverage is perhaps the most powerful and least understood. Every system has specific intervention points where a small change can alter the entire system's behavior. These might be the rules governing the system, the goals the system is designed to achieve, or the foundational beliefs through which people interpret the system. Finding and moving those intervention points can produce results that dwarf anything achievable by working harder within the system as it currently operates. Temporal leverage is the strategic use of timing. The same action produces radically different effects depending on when it's taken. Early movers establish advantages that can compound for years. Late movers can benefit from others' expensive mistakes and learning. Perfectly timed movers can catch favorable conditions that amplify their results exponentially. The true power of leverage thinking emerges when multiple types combine. Strong relationships providing access to unique information about emerging technological trends, pursued from a strategically advantageous position, using available capital. The combined effect of that cluster can be genuinely exponential. No single type alone produces anything close. One critical warning: leverage amplifies in both directions. The same factors that can produce extraordinary positive outcomes can produce extraordinary negative ones if applied incorrectly. Leverage without careful risk management is simply a mechanism for larger disasters. Wisdom about when to apply leverage and when to deliberately avoid it is as important as the leverage itself. This is why the greatest strategists in any domain combine their leverage thinking with rigorous humility about what they don't know. Highly leveraged positions in uncertain environments carry risk profiles that can be catastrophic. The 2008 financial crisis was, among other things, a story about financial leverage applied without adequate accounting for tail risk. The small probability but enormous consequence scenarios that conventional models had assigned near zero probability. When those scenarios materialized, the leverage that had been creating extraordinary returns became the mechanism for extraordinary destruction. Personal strategic leverage carries the same dynamic. Building a career that's entirely dependent on one employer, one industry, one technology platform, or one relationship creates leverage in favorable conditions, but leaves you catastrophically exposed if that single point of dependence fails. Strategic thinkers think about the resilience of their leverage structures as carefully as they think about the upside potential. The mindset to cultivate around leverage is this: always be asking whether there's a more elegant solution available before committing to the brute force approach. When you're about to pour significant direct effort into achieving something, pause and run through the 7 types of leverage. Is there a positional move that would make this easier? Is there information you don't have that would change the calculus? Is there a relationship that would create a better path? Is there technology that could automate part of this? Is there a way to time this better? Is there a systemic intervention that would create the outcome more reliably than direct effort? This habit, systematically scanning for leverage before committing to effort, is one of the highest return thinking practices you can develop. It takes seconds once it becomes automatic. And the compounded effect of finding leverage points consistently across every domain of your life is extraordinary. Strategic communication and influence communication is never just the transmission of information. Every conversation is a strategic opportunity to shape perceptions, deepen relationships, advance important objectives, and position yourself for more productive future interactions. Most people communicate reactively, saying whatever surfaces in response to whatever's immediately happening. Strategic communicators approach every significant interaction with clear intentionality, understanding that how they communicate is frequently more consequential than what they communicate. The most important insight about human communication: people make decisions based on emotion and then construct logical justifications for those decisions after the fact. Facts and rational arguments matter, but they almost never change minds by themselves. People must feel something before they'll think something, and they must trust the messenger before they'll truly hear the message. Effective strategic communication engages both the emotional and logical channels simultaneously, in that order. Understanding your audience is the prerequisite for everything. Different people process information through entirely different cognitive styles, make decisions using different criteria, and respond to different motivational approaches. Some people are persuaded by data and logical architecture. Others are moved by vivid stories and emotional resonance. Some need to see social proof, evidence that credible others have already embraced an idea. Others prefer to feel like pioneers at the frontier of something new. Strategic communicators rapidly assess their audience and adapt their communication accordingly. This isn't manipulation, it's translation. There's a profound difference between speaking your language fluently and speaking theirs. One communicates, the other connects. Framing is one of the most powerful tools available. The same information presented through different frames creates entirely different responses. Whether you describe a financial investment as securing your family's future or eliminating risk produces different emotional responses and decisions, even though the underlying facts are identical. Strategic communicators understand that how information is framed usually matters more than the information itself, and effective framing always starts from understanding what the audience values, fears, and prioritizes. Timing matters enormously. The same message can be received in completely different ways depending on when it's delivered. People are more receptive to certain types of communication when they're in particular emotional states or facing specific circumstances. Strategic communicators pay careful attention to timing and look for the optimal moments to deliver consequential messages. Sometimes planting seeds early and allowing them to mature. Sometimes creating the right conditions before attempting to communicate at all. One of the most sophisticated principles of strategic influence: the best influence often doesn't feel like influence. People resist being pushed, but they'll move willingly in directions they feel they've chosen themselves. This means your most effective approach is often to present situations in ways that naturally guide people toward a particular conclusion, while allowing them to feel they've arrived there independently, through their own judgment. their own discovery, their own choice. Credibility is the foundation of sustainable influence, and credibility is built slowly through demonstrated competence, consistent reliability, and genuine concern for others' interests. People take their cues from those they trust, and trust accrues through repeated positive interactions over extended time. This means strategic communication is fundamentally a long game, not a series of individual tactical victories. Finally, every interaction creates precedent for future interactions. How you handle one difficult conversation affects how people expect you to behave in subsequent conversations. How you treat one person influences how others expect to be treated. Strategic communicators think beyond the immediate transaction to consider the long-term relationship and reputation effects of every communication choice they make. One specific application of strategic communication that deserves focused attention is the art of delivering difficult messages. Every leader, every professional, and every person in meaningful relationships will face moments when they need to communicate something the other person doesn't want to hear. Feedback that stings, decisions that disappoint, truths that challenge comfortable beliefs. Most people handle these moments by either avoiding them entirely, leading to festering problems that grow larger over time, or by delivering the message so bluntly that the content gets lost in the emotional reaction it triggers. Strategic communicators have developed a third path, delivering difficult truths in ways that the recipient can actually hear, process, and ultimately benefit from. This requires sequencing. The emotional channel must be engaged before the logical content can land. The relationship must be affirmed before the challenge can be heard. The person must feel genuinely respected, not patronized, not managed, but genuinely respected, before they have the psychological safety to take in information that challenges their current self-concept or their current plans. This is not weakness. It is not softening difficult truths to the point of meaninglessness. It is understanding the actual architecture of how human minds receive and process challenging information and communicating in alignment with that architecture rather than against it. The most direct communicators are not those who deliver messages most bluntly. They're those who deliver messages most effectively, which means in ways that actually change understanding and behavior, rather than just triggering defensive reactions. Strategic communication is ultimately the bridge between strategic thinking and strategic outcomes. You can think with extraordinary sophistication about your situation, your options, and your approach. But if you cannot communicate those insights persuasively, mobilize others' support, navigate the inevitable resistance, and build the relationships that make complex things possible, the thinking produces limited results. Communication is where strategy meets reality. Crisis navigation and opportunity creation. In Chinese, the word for crisis is often described as containing two elements, danger and opportunity. Whether or not that etymology is fully accurate, the underlying insight is profound. Crisis and opportunity are not opposites. They are frequently the same event, viewed from different cognitive positions. The distinction lies not in the circumstances themselves, but in how you interpret them, how quickly you regain your clarity, and what you decide to do next. The first principle of strategic crisis navigation. Crisis is not an aberration. It's a guaranteed feature of any meaningful life or career. No level of preparation, no degree of competence, no amount of planning immunizes you from unexpected disruptions. Markets shift. Key relationships change. Technologies disrupt established advantages. External events create new constraints overnight. Accepting this reality allows you to prepare structurally and psychologically for crisis, rather than being shattered each time it arrives. Crisis preparation involves building redundancy and resilience into your strategies before they're needed. Multiple income streams, so you're not dependent on a single source. Diverse skill sets so you can adapt to shifting requirements. Strong relationships across different networks so you have genuine support options when you need them. The time to build these buffers is before the crisis forces you to scramble for them. When crisis hits, the single most critical strategic imperative is preserving clarity of thought. Crisis activates the brain's threat response system, which narrows attention, reduces cognitive flexibility, and biases action toward the immediately familiar. People either panic and act impulsively or freeze and fail to act at all. Neither response is strategic. The discipline of remaining calm and clear-headed precisely when the pressure is highest. This is a trainable skill, not an innate trait, and the clarity it provides creates an immediate, significant advantage over everyone in the situation who is given in to reactivity. With clarity comes accurate assessment. What has actually changed? What new constraints or opportunities has this crisis specifically created? What resources remain available? What options are still viable? Crisis almost always looks worse in its first hours than it ultimately proves to be, because uncertainty amplifies perceived threat. Accurate assessment separates real problems from the catastrophic stories fear tells about them. Speed of response also matters profoundly during crisis. Conditions change quickly. Windows open and close. Strategic thinkers have pre-built decision frameworks that allow rapid, decisive action when the situation demands it, without sacrificing analytical integrity. This doesn't mean acting recklessly on incomplete information. It means having already thought through a likely scenario so that when they arrive, the cognitive work has already been done. And here's the move that separates strategic thinkers from everyone else during a crisis. Even while managing immediate threats, they actively scan for opportunities that the disruption has created. When established patterns break down, new possibilities emerge. When traditional players are consumed by crisis management, space opens for entirely new approaches. When markets shift rapidly, competitive positions can change dramatically, for better or for worse, in very short time windows. The most advanced form of this capability is proactive disruption, strategically introducing controlled crisis into your own environment when existing patterns are limiting your progress, creating conditions that are uncomfortable enough to force necessary change, while ensuring you're better prepared for that disruption than anyone else in the situation. This approach requires extraordinary calculation. Created crises can spiral, but when executed correctly, it can accelerate change that would otherwise take years. There's a psychological dimension to crisis navigation that doesn't receive enough attention. The danger of the trauma response. When we experience significant setbacks, especially ones that felt genuinely threatening to our security, our identity, or our future, our nervous systems can encode those experiences in ways that make us hypervigilant and risk-averse long after the original crisis has passed. The person who experienced a business failure may struggle to take reasonable, calculated risks for years afterward, not because the new risks are genuinely dangerous, but because their nervous system hasn't fully distinguished between the new situation and the old one. Strategic thinkers understand this dynamic and work actively to counteract it. They distinguish between learned caution, the valuable, evidence-based updating of risk assessment based on actual experience, and trauma-encoded risk aversion, which is reflexive avoidance based on emotional memory rather than current analysis. The former makes you smarter. The latter makes you progressively less capable over time. Part of building genuine strategic resilience is developing a healthy relationship with the concept of failure itself. In environments that stigmatize failure, which includes most corporate environments, most educational systems, and many family systems, people become increasingly reluctant to attempt things they might fail at. This risk aversion compounds over time, gradually shrinking the domain of what feels possible until the person is operating in a small, safe, familiar territory that grows smaller with each passing year. Strategic thinkers reframe failure not as a verdict on their competence or character, but as information about the system they're operating in and the approach they tried. Failure tells you something real and valuable. The question is whether you're willing to extract that information and use it, or whether you'll spend your energy protecting your ego from the implications of what the outcome reveals. Building your strategic operating system. Strategic thinking cannot be something you only deploy when facing a major decision every few months. That's like only exercising before a marathon. The way to become genuinely strategic is to build strategic thinking into the operating system of your daily life, into your information habits, your decision processes, your planning rhythms, and your relationship management. A personal strategic operating system has 7 core components. Component 1, personal mission and values framework, not an inspirational slogan for a wall poster. A clear, actionable set of principles that gives you reliable guidance when facing complex choices with competing priorities. Your framework should help you quickly identify which opportunities are worth pursuing and which are distractions, which relationships deserve deep investment, and which drain more than they return, which capabilities are worth developing, and which are tangential to your real direction. Specific enough to provide real guidance. Flexible enough to evolve as you learn. Component 2, systematic information gathering. Strategic thinkers don't wait for important information to find them accidentally. They build structured processes for staying aware of trends, opportunities, and threats in their domains of interest. Regular information routines, strategic relationships that provide insider perspective, and disciplined analysis of leading indicators. The critical skill here is developing sophisticated signal/noise filters so that you're consuming information with genuine strategic value rather than just filling time. Component 3, decision-making frameworks. Different decisions require fundamentally different approaches. Routine decisions should be systematized to preserve decision-making energy for what matters. Major decisions should use structured analytical processes to ensure all relevant factors are considered. Crisis decisions should have pre-established protocols that can be activated rapidly. Your frameworks should integrate both analytical rigor and intuitive check processes. Component 4, multi-horizon goal setting and planning. Your daily actions must be connected to your weekly progress, which must build toward monthly objectives, which must advance annual goals, which must compound toward your long-term vision. This multi-horizon thinking prevents the most common strategic failure mode. Being perpetually busy while making no meaningful progress on what actually matters most. Component 5, strategic resource allocation principles. You cannot pursue every opportunity or maintain every relationship at the same depth. Strategic resource allocation means consciously choosing where to focus your time, energy, attention, and capital for maximum impact. The underlying concept is opportunity cost. Every choice to invest in one thing is simultaneously a choice not to invest in something else. Making these trade-offs consciously rather than accidentally is itself a major strategic advantage. Component 6, feedback and learning systems. Strategic mastery develops through experience, but only if you systematically extract the lessons available in that experience. This requires honest assessment of both successes and failures, understanding that success can be as misleading as failure if you don't investigate what actually caused it. Sometimes you succeed despite poor decisions because of luck or favorable conditions. Sometimes you fail despite excellent decisions because of factors outside your control. Understanding these distinctions is how you actually improve. Component 7. Relationship and network management. Strategic relationships multiply your capabilities, but they require active stewardship, meaningful contact maintained over time, consistent contributions to others' objectives, and the willingness to ask for help when you genuinely need it. Your network management system should ensure that important relationships don't erode through neglect during periods when they're not immediately urgent. Building a personal strategic operating system is not a one-time project. It's an ongoing practice of refinement. You build an initial version based on your best current understanding of your objectives, constraints, and environment. You run it. You observe what's working and what isn't. You iterate. Over time, through this cycle of design, execution, and reflection, your operating system becomes increasingly well-suited to who you are, what you're trying to accomplish, and the specific environment you're operating in. What does a mature strategic operating system feel like from the inside? It feels like a kind of settled clarity. You don't experience the same degree of decision fatigue that others experience because most of your routine choices are already guided by established principles. You don't experience the same anxiety about the future because you've already thought through multiple scenarios and have contingent plans for each. You don't experience the same reactive overwhelm when unexpected things happen because you have frameworks for rapid assessment and a default toward bias for action. You also experience something that's harder to describe but unmistakable once you have it: a sense of authorship. The feeling that you are genuinely the primary force directing your life rather than being directed by it. Not in the naive sense of believing you control outcomes. You don't. And the strategic mindset has no illusions about that. But in the deep sense of knowing that your thinking, your choices, your positioning, and your consistent actions are the primary inputs into your life's trajectory, that the story you're living is fundamentally your story, told in your terms, moving in a direction you've deliberately chosen. That is what a fully functioning personal strategic operating system delivers, and it is entirely within your reach to build one. Advanced psychological strategy. The most sophisticated strategic thinking operates at the level of perception, emotion, and cognition. This isn't manipulation. It's the applied science of how human minds actually function, used to communicate more effectively and create outcomes that work for everyone involved. The foundational insight: people do not respond to objective reality. They respond to their perception of reality. Two people facing identical circumstances can have completely different responses based entirely on how they interpret and frame those circumstances. This means that influencing the frame is often more powerful than changing the underlying facts. Human perception is systematically shaped by cognitive biases, mental shortcuts that evolve to help us process complex information quickly. Understanding these biases is enormously valuable. The availability heuristic causes people to dramatically overestimate the probability of events they can vividly recall. The confirmation bias drives people to seek information, confirming their existing beliefs while filtering out contradiction. The anchoring effect causes initial information to exert disproportionate influence on subsequent judgment. Strategic thinkers recognize these patterns and work with them ethically. If you want someone to take a particular risk seriously, provide vivid, concrete examples of that risk materializing. If you want someone to find your proposal reasonable, anchor their expectations with a more extreme initial frame that makes your actual proposal feel moderate by comparison. The psychology of commitment and consistency is another powerful dimension. People have a deep psychological need to appear consistent with their previous statements and behaviors. Once someone has publicly committed to a position, they'll go to considerable lengths to justify that commitment rather than admit they were wrong. because changing your mind requires acknowledging a previous error, which threatens both self-esteem and social status. Strategic thinkers use this by seeking small initial agreements that create psychological momentum toward larger agreements. Social proof creates powerful herd dynamics. When people are uncertain about the right course of action, they look to what credible others who resemble them have done. This creates cascades of adoption that follow from early credible endorsements. Strategic application of social proof means carefully choosing proof sources that your specific audience actually respects and identifies with, not just anyone impressive. Authority and expertise create automatic deference, particularly in areas where people feel uncertain about their own judgment. Building genuine authority in relevant domains, and then leveraging that credibility appropriately, is one of the most sustainable long-term influence strategies available. Reciprocity creates social obligations. When someone provides something genuinely valuable, without an obvious expectation of immediate return, it activates a powerful psychological drive to reciprocate. Strategic relationship building leverages this by consistently providing value first, not transactionally, not with visible scorekeeping, but as a genuine expression of the relationship's importance. Framing effects represent perhaps the single most practical tool in this entire domain. The same information leads to completely different decisions depending on how it's framed. A medical treatment described as having an 85% success rate produces different decisions than one described as carrying a 15% failure rate, even though those facts are identical. Strategic framing requires understanding your audience's specific values, fears, and priorities, and presenting information in ways that genuinely align with those psychological factors. One of the most practically powerful applications of psychological strategy is in navigating resistance. Every significant initiative, proposal, or change effort encounters resistance. Most people respond to resistance by arguing harder, marshaling more evidence, making more forceful logical arguments, applying more direct pressure. And this approach consistently backfires. It activates the other person's psychological immune system. They dig in deeper. The resistance increases. Strategic thinkers understand that resistance is almost never purely logical. People resist change, resist new ideas, and resist proposals for a complex mixture of reasons. Some rational, many emotional, and most partially unconscious. They might resist because the proposal threatens their status. They might resist because it implies that their previous approach was wrong. They might resist because they weren't involved in developing the idea and therefore don't own it. They might resist because the change requires them to develop new skills, and that feels threatening. Addressing resistance strategically requires first understanding which of these forces is actually operating, then addressing those underlying forces rather than just the stated objections. Creating opportunities for the resistant person to feel involved, heard, and respected. Finding ways to help them protect what they're trying to protect, their status, their identity, their past choices, while still moving toward the needed change. And sometimes simply giving the process more time than feels comfortable, because some forms of resistance only dissolve when people have had enough time to adjust to a new reality before they're asked to commit to it. This is patient, sophisticated work, but it produces outcomes that blunt force persuasion cannot. Genuine buy-in, lasting commitment, and the kind of collaborative energy that actually sustains meaningful change over time. Strategic alliance building and network effects. No one achieves anything truly significant entirely alone. The most accomplished people across every domain, business, science, government, the arts, have been masters at building strategic alliances, cultivating powerful networks, and creating collaborative relationships that multiply their individual capabilities far beyond what solo effort could produce. In an interconnected world, your network is not just professionally valuable, it is among your most significant strategic assets. Full stop. But most people approach networking incorrectly. They treat it as a transactional activity, collecting contacts, attending events, exchanging business cards, rather than as the slow, deliberate cultivation of genuinely valuable mutual relationships. The foundation is an abundance mindset. Scarcity-minded people approach relationships as zero-sum. Helping someone else somehow diminishes their own prospects. Abundance-minded people understand that success is not finite, and that actively helping others achieve their objectives frequently creates opportunities for mutual benefit that wouldn't otherwise exist. This mindset shift changes everything about how you build relationships. Instead of arriving at every interaction with the question, "What can this person do for me?" you arrive with, "What can I do for this person?" Instead of extracting value from individual transactions, you build toward relationships that create compounding value over time. Instead of keeping score, you invest generously in the people who matter, knowing that this investment will return in forms, and at times you cannot predict. Network effects occur when the value of a network grows exponentially as more valuable members join it. The telephone network metaphor is classic. Each new telephone makes every existing telephone more valuable because there are more people to connect with. The most sophisticated form of network building involves creating structures that generate ongoing value for network members, independently of your direct involvement. Communities, forums, events, or platforms that bring valuable people together consistently. When you create these structures, you position yourself at the center of a valuable network, rather than simply as a member of someone else's. Strategic alliances often emerge from the recognition of complementary strengths. You might be exceptional at generating ideas and vision, but struggle with operational execution. Someone else might be extraordinary at implementation and delivery, but need better strategic direction. Partnerships that combine genuinely complementary capabilities can achieve results that neither party could approach independently. These partnerships work best when they're built on mutual respect for different contributions, rather than an attempt to compensate for others' weaknesses from a position of superiority. Understanding the distinction between strong ties and weak ties is critical for network strategy. Strong ties, the people you interact with regularly and know deeply, are valuable for collaboration, support, and rich information sharing. Weak ties, people you know casually or connect with infrequently, are often more valuable for discovering new opportunities because they expose you to information and possibilities that don't circulate within your immediate circle. Most people instinctively invest in deepening their existing strong ties while allowing their weak ties to gradually atrophy. The research on this is clear and somewhat counterintuitive. Weak ties frequently provide more career-changing opportunities than strong ones, precisely because they connect you to worlds and networks you would never reach through your immediate circle. The practical implication is that network building should include deliberate cultivation of connections outside your primary domain. People in different industries, different geographies, different professional functions, different cultural contexts. These connections expose you to different ways of thinking, different market intelligence, and different opportunity streams. They also provide something equally valuable: perspective on your own situation that your immediate circle, being too close to it, cannot easily provide. One of the most underutilized networking strategies is what might be called strategic generosity. Actively connecting people in your network who would benefit from knowing each other with no expectation of immediate return. When you introduce a startup founder you know to an investor who would be interested in their work, you create value for both of them. Both feel grateful to you. Both have a reason to want to reciprocate. And you've made your network more valuable not just for yourself, but for everyone in it. Which is exactly the dynamic that makes networks compound over time. The deepest form of network leverage isn't about individual relationships at all. It's about becoming the kind of person and creating the kind of presence that attracts remarkable people consistently. This happens when you're known for genuine generosity, for distinctive insight, for reliable follow-through, and for making every interaction genuinely better for the other person. When that reputation is established, the network builds itself. Remarkable people seek you out. Opportunities arrive without active prospecting. The network that once required active cultivation begins to generate returns that feel disproportionate to any current effort, because you're now harvesting the compounding returns of years of consistent investment. This is the ultimate form of relationship leverage, not a network you maintain, but a reputation that attracts. Long-term strategic positioning and legacy building. Most people live tactically, focused on immediate problems and short-term goals. Some develop the ability to think strategically, considering medium-term implications and competitive positioning. But the most consistently remarkable individuals think across decades, building positions, capabilities, and reputations that compound over time into sustainable advantages and meaningful impact. Long-term strategic positioning is about playing what game theorists call the infinite game. Not just winning this particular round, but positioning yourself to keep playing, keep improving, and keep contributing across an extended timeline. Your current position is not your permanent position. Every skill you develop, every relationship you invest in, every reputation you establish, and every asset you accumulate is positioning you for future opportunities that don't yet exist. The question isn't just whether your current activities are productive today. It's whether they're building capabilities and positions that will be genuinely valuable 10 or 20 years from now. This requires developing what economists call dynamic capabilities. Not just the ability to do specific things well, but the ability to learn new things, adapt to changing conditions, and reconfigure your resources as circumstances evolve. In rapidly changing environments, static capabilities become obsolete. Dynamic capabilities allow you to maintain relevance and effectiveness, regardless of how external conditions shift. Long-term positioning requires understanding and anticipating megatrends, the large, slow-moving forces that reshape entire industries and societies over extended time horizons. Artificial intelligence and automation, demographic aging and urbanization, the long-term implications of climate change and resource pressure, the ongoing expansion of global connectivity. You cannot predict exactly how these trends will manifest, but you can position yourself to benefit from multiple plausible manifestations. By developing skills that will be valuable across several scenarios, building relationships with people influential in emerging domains, and creating assets that become more valuable as the underlying trends accelerate. Reputation and credibility compound over time when managed with consistent intentionality. Every professional interaction, every piece of work you produce, every commitment you honor or break, these contribute to how others perceive your character and capabilities. These perceptions accumulate. They become your reputation. And reputation becomes an increasingly powerful asset as your career matures, because it operates as social collateral that opens doors you couldn't pry open any other way. Building long-term reputation requires genuine consistency between stated values and actual behavior, even when that consistency is costly in the short term. The leaders and professionals remembered most generously are almost invariably those who maintain their integrity in exactly the moments when compromising it would have been easier. Option value is a concept central to long-term positioning. Some investments don't pay off immediately. They create valuable future choices, learning a language that's not immediately relevant to your work. building relationships in adjacent industries that seem tangential to your current focus, developing capabilities in emerging technologies before there's obvious demand for them. These activities often look inefficient in the short term, but in uncertain environments, and virtually all environments are genuinely uncertain, preserving flexibility is itself enormously valuable. Legacy thinking extends the frame beyond your own career trajectory to consider how your work and choices will affect others who matter to you and to broader communities. It asks not just what position you're building, but what you're building it for, and whether the position you're creating will ultimately enable you to make the contributions that, when you look back, will have mattered most. There's a distinction worth drawing carefully here between legacy as ego project and legacy as genuine contribution. The legacy as ego version is fundamentally about being remembered, about leaving a mark, making a name, achieving a scale of recognition that outlasts you. This motivation is understandable and not entirely without value, but it tends to produce a particular kind of distortion. It optimizes for visibility and credit rather than actual impact. It makes collaboration difficult because sharing credit feels threatening. It pushes toward dramatic gestures over quiet, consistent, deep work. Legacy as genuine contribution starts from a different question. What actually needs doing that I'm specifically positioned to do? Where does my particular combination of capabilities, relationships, resources, and perspective overlap with a genuine unmet need in the world? What can I build, teach, create, or catalyze that will continue generating value beyond my direct involvement? This framing produces different choices. It's more likely to lead toward patient, collaborative, deep work that builds something real over time. It's more likely to involve generously developing other people's capabilities rather than hoarding expertise. And interestingly, it tends to produce more lasting recognition than the ego-driven version, because impact, done honestly and deeply, tends to become visible over time in ways that manufactured visibility does not. Long-term strategic positioning at its highest expression is not about winning the game. It's about contributing to something worth winning for, mastering strategic execution and implementation. The most brilliant strategy in history creates exactly zero value if it cannot be executed. While much of our focus in this audiobook has been on analysis, planning, and decision frameworks, the ultimate test of any strategy is whether it translates into consistent action that produces real results. And this is precisely where most strategies fail. Not because they were poorly conceived, but because they were poorly implemented. Strategic thinking and strategic execution require different skills and different mindsets. Strategic thinking is conceptual, analytical, and focused on possibility. Strategic execution is practical, operational, and grounded in reality. Many people are excellent at one and struggle with the other. Mastering strategy requires becoming genuinely capable at both and building systems that bridge between them. Execution begins with translation, transforming abstract objectives into specific, actionable tasks that real people with finite time and limited resources can actually complete. Most strategic plans fail because they remain at too high a level of abstraction. They specify what should be achieved, but not how it will be achieved, who will achieve it, by when, or with what resources. Effective execution planning requires breaking strategic objectives into progressively more specific levels of detail until you reach tasks that individuals can complete within defined timeframes. This breakdown process also reveals dependencies, which tasks must complete before others can begin, which resources are required by multiple activities simultaneously, which people are critical to multiple components and therefore represent potential bottlenecks. Understanding these dependencies allows you to sequence activities intelligently, and protect the critical path elements that could derail the entire strategy. Strategic execution requires building systems and processes that maintain consistent progress, even when motivation fluctuates and circumstances change. Willpower and enthusiasm drive initial momentum, but they're finite and unreliable over the extended time horizons that real strategies require. Systematic execution means creating structures, routines, and accountability mechanisms that sustain momentum regardless of temporary setbacks or motivational dips. Resource allocation is one of the most critical and most consistently underestimated aspects of strategic execution. Every strategy requires finite resources: time, money, attention, human effort. These resources must be deliberately allocated across competing priorities in ways that maximize overall progress. Poor resource allocation causes even brilliantly conceived strategies to fail. The distinction between critical path activities and supporting activities is central here. Critical path items must complete before other activities can begin. High-leverage activities create disproportionate results relative to the resources they consume. Foundational activities enable multiple subsequent steps. Strategic executors understand these distinctions and allocate accordingly, not spreading resources evenly, but concentrating them where they create the most downstream impact. Performance measurement must be built into strategic execution from the beginning, and measuring strategic execution requires different metrics than measuring operational efficiency. Operational metrics capture how well things are running. Strategic metrics capture whether you're actually making progress toward your objectives, whether capabilities are being built, whether positioning is improving, whether the trajectory is right. The most sophisticated level of strategic execution creates self-reinforcing improvement. Successful execution strengthens your capability to execute future strategies even more effectively. This is the compounding effect applied to operational excellence. Each execution cycle teaches you something that makes the next one better. Organizations and individuals who consistently execute with discipline develop reputational and operational advantages that become increasingly difficult for competitors to match. There is a specific failure mode in execution that deserves particular attention: the seduction of planning. Planning feels productive. It feels strategic. It generates documents, frameworks, presentations, and roadmaps that look like progress and generate the positive social signal of appearing organized and forward-thinking. But planning is not execution, and the planning phase can extend indefinitely if not deliberately constrained, consuming the time and attention that execution requires while producing the psychological reward of feeling busy and purposeful. Strategic executors have an almost ruthless relationship with the transition from planning to action. They understand that a good plan executed now is almost always superior to a perfect plan executed later. They know that the information required to truly optimize a plan in advance often doesn't exist until you start executing and encounter actual reality. And they recognize that the longer a plan sits unexecuted, the more the conditions it was designed for will have shifted, potentially invalidating the plan's most important assumptions. This doesn't mean executing carelessly or without adequate preparation. It means understanding that execution itself is a form of information gathering, that the fastest path to the information you need to make your plan work is often to start executing it. Observe what happens and adjust in real time. The military concept of bias toward action captures this principle well. In genuinely complex and uncertain situations, waiting for perfect information is not a conservative strategy. It's a high-risk strategy, because conditions are continuously changing and the cost of delay often exceeds the cost of imperfect initial action. The bias toward action, combined with rapid feedback loops and genuine willingness to adjust, is frequently more effective than extensive upfront analysis followed by committed single-path execution. Strategic mastery in execution ultimately shows up as a particular kind of confidence. Not the confidence of certainty about outcomes, but the confidence of trust in your ability to navigate whatever the execution process reveals. You don't need to know exactly how it will unfold. You need to trust that you can handle what you find. Becoming a master strategic thinker. After absorbing every framework, principle, and technique in this audiobook, you might reasonably wonder what actually distinguishes a master strategic thinker from someone who simply knows a lot about strategy. The difference is not in knowing more concepts. It's in having developed the judgment to know when and how to apply them, the pattern recognition to see what others miss, the wisdom to pursue worthy objectives rather than merely clever ones, and the character to use strategic intelligence in service of something larger than immediate self-interest. Strategic mastery begins with integration. Beginning strategic thinkers apply frameworks consciously and deliberately, which is appropriate for the learning phase, but too slow and cumbersome for complex real-world situations. Master strategic thinkers have internalized frameworks so deeply that they operate intuitively, freeing conscious attention to focus on the unique, irreducible aspects of each specific situation. This integration comes only from extensive practice across genuinely diverse situations over extended time. There's no shortcut. Mastery also requires developing what might be called meta-strategic thinking, the ability to think strategically about your own strategic thinking, to recognize the limitations of your own frameworks, to understand when your preferred approaches might be inappropriate for the situation in front of you, to continuously evolve your capabilities based on what experience reveals. Meta-strategic thinking includes deep self-awareness about your own cognitive biases and emotional patterns, the places where your thinking reliably leads you astray, and the discipline to compensate for those patterns, rather than being unconsciously governed by them. True strategic mastery involves understanding that strategy without character is ultimately self-defeating. The most technically sophisticated strategic capabilities can be deployed destructively. And when they are, they create enemies, damage reputation, and eventually provoke counter-strategies that can be more powerful and more damaging than anything the original strategist anticipated. Strategies built on creating genuine value and developing mutually beneficial relationships are not just more ethical, they're more robust and more sustainable over time. Strategic thinkers who understand this aren't just choosing to be good, they're being intelligent about the long game. Master strategic thinkers also understand when not to be strategic. This is perhaps the most counterintuitive insight in the entire domain. Life is not entirely strategic. Some of the most important experiences and relationships emerge from non-strategic openness to possibility, rather than calculated positioning. Some of the most valuable insights arise from intuitive creative leaps that bypass analytical reasoning entirely. Some of the most meaningful achievements result from following genuine passion and purpose, rather than optimizing for strategic advantage. Wisdom involves knowing which mode is appropriate for which moment, and the courage to choose authentic presence over strategic calculation when that's what the situation calls for. Cultural competence is increasingly critical for strategic mastery in a genuinely interconnected world. Different cultures hold profoundly different assumptions about time horizons, relationship dynamics, authority structures, communication norms, and decision-making processes. Approaches that work powerfully in one cultural context can fail completely in another. Master strategic thinkers develop the capacity to understand and operate within diverse cultural frameworks rather than projecting their own cultural assumptions universally. Strategic mastery ultimately manifests as a particular way of experiencing life. Instead of feeling like a passive recipient of circumstances beyond your control, you recognize your genuine agency in shaping outcomes. Instead of reacting to events as they arrive, you anticipate developments and position yourself before they land. Instead of struggling against forces you don't understand, you learn to read those forces, work with them, and leverage them toward your objectives. And yet, alongside all that agency, master strategic thinkers carry genuine humility. They understand that they are not separate from the systems they seek to influence. They are embedded within those systems, and their own actions contribute to the very conditions they're navigating. This system's awareness tempers any illusion of complete control, while simultaneously revealing the profound influence that patient, consistent, intelligent action can have across time. Your journey towards strategic mastery begins with a decision to approach your own development strategically, to treat every situation as an opportunity to practice strategic thinking, to learn consciously from both your successes and your failures, to gradually build the pattern recognition, the judgment, and the wisdom that frameworks alone cannot provide. The tools and principles in this audiobook give you the foundation, but mastery develops in the field, in the messy, ambiguous, high-stakes situations of your actual life, where you have to make real decisions with real consequences and real people involved. Every challenge you navigate is developing your strategic capability. Every decision you make consciously is building your judgment. The world genuinely needs more people who think strategically, act ethically, and direct their capabilities toward creating value, rather than simply capturing it. As you develop these skills, you become part of a community of thinkers who understand that the highest use of strategic intelligence is not personal advantage for its own sake, but contribution to solutions for the complex, interconnected challenges that shape all of our lives. The game never ends. The world keeps evolving, which means strategy must keep evolving. But you now have something more valuable than any single strategy. You have a system for developing better strategies as the world changes. Let's take a moment to review what you've built across these 15 chapters. You began by understanding the strategic mindset, the fundamental shift from reactive to proactive, from passive to deliberate, from living in response to living by design. You develop the architecture of strategic intelligence, pattern recognition, systems thinking, scenario planning, temporal awareness, and metacognitive self-knowledge. You absorb the 7 laws of strategic advantage and learn to see how they interact and amplify each other. You learn to read the invisible game, the motivations, power dynamics, historical contexts, cultural forces, and psychological patterns that operate beneath the surface of every situation. You developed a science of strategic decision-making that goes beyond gut instinct to include rigorous framing, probabilistic evaluation, bias correction, and disciplined implementation. You built the capacity to think multiple moves ahead, using scenario branching, backward induction, and player-type analysis to anticipate how situations will evolve. You mastered the 7 forms of leverage and learned to systematically scan for leverage opportunities before committing to direct effort. You developed a sophisticated framework for strategic communication and influence, one grounded in emotional understanding, precise framing, and the long-term credibility that comes only from genuine authenticity. You built a crisis navigation system that transforms disruption into opportunity. You designed your personal strategic operating system, the integrated infrastructure that makes strategic thinking a daily practice rather than an occasional event. You explored the advanced psychological dimensions of strategic influence. You developed a framework for building strategic alliances and network effects that compound over time. You thought seriously about long-term positioning, legacy, and the kind of contribution that outlasts any individual career. You confronted the execution gap and developed the disciplines required to translate brilliant thinking into real-world results. And you've begun to understand what strategic mastery actually means, not as a destination, but as a continuous practice. What comes next is yours to determine. The frameworks are tools. The principles are maps, but the territory is your actual life. The specific circumstances, relationships, challenges, and opportunities that are uniquely yours. No audiobook, however comprehensive, can tell you exactly how to apply these tools in the particular situations you face. That application is the creative work. That's where you take everything you've learned and make it genuinely yours. Start somewhere specific. Pick one principle from this audiobook, just one, and commit to practicing it consciously for the next 30 days. Maybe it's the pattern recognition habit. Maybe it's the multi-horizon decision evaluation. Maybe it's the leverage scan. Maybe it's building your scenario planning practice. Choose one, practice it with genuine intention, and observe what changes. Then add another, and another. Over time, these practices will become automatic, will integrate with each other, and will begin to compound in ways that are difficult to predict from the outside, but unmistakable from within. You'll start noticing things you used to miss. You'll start anticipating developments that used to catch you off guard. You'll start finding leverage points where you used to see only obstacles. You'll start making decisions with a clarity and confidence that comes not from certainty about outcomes, but from deep trust in your own thinking process. That is what strategic mastery feels like from the inside. The choice, as it has always been, is yours. Make it strategically.